Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak here today. This is a great honor. I was fortunate enough to come and speak last year. I'm currently researching the story of Native people who have served in the Washington legislature. Actually, the Washington Territorial Legislature and then the Washington State Legislature, going back into the mid-19th century. These are interesting stories and I think very little known. By my count, there are 14 people over the years who have served in the legislature who either are tribal members or would qualify to be tribal members today. I was particularly interested to see the two people who spoke earlier from Wisconsin, particularly the gentleman who was a Ho-Chunk member. The first Native woman to serve in the Washington legislature was a woman named Gladys Phillips, who was elected in 1950 from Grays Harbor County. She was elected to the House of Representatives, served one term. She was a brilliant woman, and she was of Menominee descent, Wisconsin tribe. Very proud of that. She was also Cherokee through her father. She was a brilliant lawyer, a superb advocate, and argued for the Quinault in several very important cases before courts in this state and the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. Sad to say, this is back in the 1960s. She didn't win, but people were nonetheless struck by her skill and by one other thing. She was a strikingly beautiful woman. And she remained beautiful until the day that she died in 2000. People spoke about her presence, her dignity, and her amazing intelligence, and they still talk about her in Grays Harbor County today. So I'm very grateful to have the chance to meet people and to learn more about people like Gladys Phillips. I'm going to talk today about a completely different subject. I worked for many years for the Washington State Legislature. I was fortunate enough to work for Senator McCoy as he worked on Indian law-related bills. And I was particularly interested in that subject because for 8 years I lived and worked in the northern Mariana Islands. And I'm a very visual person, so I'm going to have to try to figure out how to get onto a photograph or a series of photographs, and I may have to actually ask for some help here. Thank you so much. So I am not a skillful speaker, and I can't draw images in your minds like some of the speakers who have been up here earlier who have been described in so many things vividly. So I'm going to have to rely a bit on photographs here. The Northern Mariana Islands, it's a U.S. territory, and many people have not heard of this place. They may have heard of Puerto Rico, they may have heard of the Virgin Islands, but they don't know about the Northern Mariana Islands. And in fact, they're sometimes surprised to hear that there are islands north of Guam in the Western Pacific that are a U.S. territory, and the people who live there are U.S. citizens. There's even a quarter that was issued in 2009, and you can see the quarter in the middle of the screen there. And so next time you see this quarter, you might think about this place. It has a little over 50,000 inhabitants. And it has a very unusual aspect to it in United States law that it shares with American Samoa. And that aspect relates to the theme, I think, of this symposium today. Unusually, in these islands and also in American Samoa, you have to be a native person to hold the title to land. Think about that for a minute. You cannot be an outsider and own land there. You have to be a native person. Well, who is a native person? Well, in the Northern Mariana Islands, they use a system that many tribal members here will recognize. They use a base roll that was established in about 1950, and you have to be of at least 1/4 descent from a person on that base roll to be an owner of the land. Now, an outsider can come in and lease the land for up to 55 years, but the local people many years ago, when they voted to become U.S. citizens in a new U.S. Territory, were very, very adamant about making certain that they did not lose their land. Very important to them. And the people in American Samoa also have this very interesting legal protection. In American Samoa, my understanding is you have to be of at least half local descent, native descent, in order to own land there. There was a very interesting lawsuit that was going through the federal courts, and some people thought it might go up to the U.S. Supreme Court last year, involving people from American Samoa who wanted to have full U.S. citizenship. Right now, if you're from American Samoa, you are a U.S. national. You don't have full U.S. citizenship. Some people felt that they should be U.S. citizens just like anybody else here on the mainland. But the government in American Samoa, they were very nervous about this lawsuit, because the concern is that if the people in American Samoa become full U.S. citizens, they could lose this legal protection that protects their land. The people in the Northern Mariana Islands were also watching this lawsuit, because the danger is that the U.S. Supreme Court potentially could say that this distinction that enables these people to hold on to their land is invalid legally. The Equal Protection Clause of the United States Constitution should apply, and this kind of distinction is invalid, so anybody, any U.S. citizen, could own land out there. But what happened in that federal lawsuit involving American Samoa is that the court was ultimately dismissed, and this legal protection remains in place today. So that's a very interesting aspect of law out there. The second very interesting aspect of law in American Samoa and the Northern Mariana Islands is that they still apply customary law. This is very unusual. If you want to become a member of the bar out there, if you're trained in a law school here and you decide, oh, goodness sakes, I want to work in a U.S. territory overseas, the Northern Mariana Islands, I'm going to go out there, I'm going to take the bar exam, and I'm going to become a lawyer there. Well, a lot of it is very recognizable to people who study law here, but they don't know about customary law, and you would not know about it unless you read the case law from this jurisdiction and had some understanding of the indigenous cultures there. There are two of them, and I'll just briefly talk about them today. This place has a very, in my mind, strange history. The early history is fascinating. It's not strange. These islands were first settled probably more than 3,000 years ago by native people who migrated across in seagoing voyages from the Philippines. They settled there more than 3,000 years ago and had a vibrant culture. These are the Chamorro people who remain there to this day. In the 17th century, in the 16th century, the Spanish voyager Magellan came to these islands. The Spanish became aware of them, and they colonized them, and they were there for 3 centuries, and they left a very deep imprint on local culture. So the Spanish were there for 3 centuries, and then around the year 1899, Spain sold these islands to Germany. The native people had no say in any of this. The Spanish wanted to get out of that part of the world. They just lost the Spanish-American War in the United States. Their country was facing many debts and so forth. They sold these islands to Germany. So the Germans are there for 14 years, from around 1900 until 1914. And then at the beginning of World War I, The Japanese, who in World War I are allied with the British and the French against the Germans, the war breaks out and the Japanese swoop down and they take over all of these islands and they become the next colonizer. And they're there for 30 years, from 1914 until 1944. And they leave a deep imprint on the society. Well, come World War II, these islands are held by the Japanese, and then the United States during the war is sweeping across the Pacific, driving towards Japan, and these islands become very strategic, and it's important for the military to take these islands. And so there is, on Saipan, where I lived for 8 years, a hellish battle in which 3,500 U.S. service members were killed, 10,000 wounded, 30,000 Japanese were killed, and scores of local people who still lived on the island by that point also died. It was a horrific battle. After the battle, the United States remains in Saipan, and they then become the next administrator or colonizer in the view of some people. And then these islands then become under U.S. jurisdiction. After World War II, they become administered under a UN trusteeship agreement. So it's a treaty that has to be ratified by the U.S. Senate, and it's got a very interesting provision in it. The UN trusteeship agreement says, one provision says, the customs of the inhabitants of the trust territory shall be preserved. This is a very important point that local people were very keen on. And so judges there, some of whom came out from the United States, and then eventually local people became judges there, began to apply customary law. Well, what is customary law? Well, it often relates to land ownership. And there was talk earlier today about some cultures here in the United States, or what is now the United States, being females having a very important voice. There are two cultures on Saipan, indigenous cultures. One culture is the culture of the people who have lived there for thousands of years, the Chamorro people. In this slide up here, there are several Chamorro people up in the left-hand corner, including the current Chief Justice of the Northern Mariana Islands, a wonderful judge named Alex Castro. Those are Chamorro people. On the bottom is a member of the other indigenous group, the Carolinian people. And these are people who migrated up to the islands in the 19th century from islands to the south after a typhoon, what some people would call a hurricane, goes through the islands and devastates some of the islands. So they migrate up in canoes like this one at the right on the bottom. In that culture, in the Carolinian culture, the oldest woman in a generation controls the land. Her voice is paramount. And under the law as it's applied in these islands now, she is said to be a customary trustee. And she is, the land cannot be sold, the land cannot be leased, the structures cannot be built on the land without that individual's consent. And under this system, the oldest woman in a generation makes those decisions, and when she passes away, this land, in many cases, can pass on to the oldest daughter in generation. And so she then will continue that tradition of acting as the most important voice regarding the management of that land. Very interesting thing about that culture, the women are associated with the land, the men are associated with the sea. So men like this wonderful man in the bottom of the photo, whose name is Lino Olapai, I had the honor of meeting him years ago, are the people that retain this amazing tradition of being able to navigate by the stars across the ocean, not using traditional maps as we would have them. They look at the wave patterns, they look at the stars, they look at the sun as it rises and sets, they look at birds, and they retain this knowledge that has been handed down over generations and is very difficult to acquire. The other culture in the northern Mariana Islands, the Chamorro culture, has been, it was believed that it was originally a matrilineal society. It was a society that, like the Carolinian society, is based on descent through women. The family groups are organized that way. Now it has become essentially patrilineal, and the role of men, again, it's a Spanish influence, has become central. And they have land that is owned communally, but generally a father's wishes regarding that land are paramount, and the father can hand down land to the children. Another, the last distinction that I'll mention about land tenure in these islands that is particularly interesting and would not be recognized anywhere here in the United States outside of American Samoa, which is somewhat similar, is that you can have an oral transfer of land there. You don't need a deed, you don't need a written document. They're very keen on keeping that system, but what that means is that sometimes land can be transferred under an oral agreement from one person to another, and there might be an intense argument many years later that comes out in court as to what somebody actually said many years ago. That can be one point of contention. Another point of contention is, how is the tradition, how is the customary law established? Well, to do that, you bring in an elder, and these people are recognized as experts in community customary law, and they will testify in court. And sometimes you can have different opinions among elders, and so you have to decide who is more, has the more authentic vision. And then finally, you have to decide whether a family has actually followed this customary law as the land is transferred down the generations. I know that we're a little short on time, so I will just end by remarking that I lived there in this beautiful place in the 1990s. It has a population of a little over 50,000. Wonderful people there. I think sometimes on rainy days here of the beautiful weather there and the colorful foliage, the flame trees, the beautiful lagoons, the wonderful beaches. But the thing that I really miss the most are some of the people that I met there, who are absolutely some of the kindest, most thoughtful people that you would meet anywhere. And I would class Lino Olapai in that group. This is the man who is down in the photo on the bottom. He looks friendly and warm and kind, and that's because he is friendly and warm and kind. And it makes me happy to think of people like him and of the wonderful opportunity that I had to work in a place like this. So thank you for your time today.